So imagine you just came out of something that was important. Maybe it was an interview, maybe it was a conversation you've been rehearsing in the shower for weeks, or maybe a meeting where you had to speak and you could hear your own voice going too fast. And you're not even out of the parking lot before your phone is at your ear. And the person you're talking on the phone with wasn't there. They weren't in the same room with you earlier. They don't know what you said or how you said it or what anybody's facial reaction was while you were saying it. And you call them anyway. You explain what happened earlier and then you ask them the same question. Hey, did you think that went okay? And they say the same thing they were always going to say. I'm sure it was fine. And something in your chest actually loosened, like somebody let the air out of it. You feel the actual relief for only about 20 minutes or so. And then it tightens right back up again. And you're going back through the whole thing again in your mind, line by line. And you're working out who else you should call to get that same reassurance. But here's the thing. That relief initially was real. You genuinely feel better for a bit. But why did it run out so fast? And why did you need another dose by lunchtime? So if you can't settle after something until someone else tells you it was fine, if you'd ever asked two different people the same question in the same hour, this episode is for you. Welcome to Self-Full, the show where we get to the bottom of the doubt we can't talk ourselves out of. My name is Wilson, and I'm not a naturally confident person. I've just spent a long time working out what confidence actually is, which turns out to be a completely different thing from what I thought it was. And today we're diving into the need for reassurance, but not the version you've heard 900 times. Nobody here is going to tell you to stand in front of a mirror and believe in yourself. I have never once seen that work on an actual human being. I mean, that's just for me, I guess. So here's where we're going. First, what you're actually handing over when you ask somebody, was that okay? Without even meaning to. Then, why that gives you real relief that runs out so fast. And then, how to change what you ask people for so that the answer finally sticks. And I want to say this part early because I know how this habit feels from the inside. There is nothing needy about you. This is purely a habit, and habit can be changed. And honestly, that's a much better problem to have than a personal flaw. So if you're the person who always needs somebody to say it one more time before you can move on, stick around, because this is where that doubt stops running your whole day. So let's get specific about what this actually looks like, because it wears a lot of different outfits. Sometimes it's writing the message and then sending it to a friend first before you send it to the person it's actually meant for. Sometimes it's walking out of the conversation and turning to whoever's nearest and going, was that weird? And sometimes it's asking your partner whether everything's okay between the two of you for the third time this week and watching their face while you ask it. And then sometimes there's nobody around to ask at all, so you do it on your own. You reread your own sent message like 11 times, you replay the conversation in your head on a loop, hunting for the exact second it went wrong. Same behavior, no audience. And every single version of it has the same shape. There's a question you can't close. And the question goes, did I do okay? And you go looking for somebody who will close that question for you. Now, the checking itself is old machinery. Your brain has been keeping track of where you stand with people since you were small because for most human history, getting that wrong could genuinely cost you. We've talked about this in previous episodes. So the checking itself is not the problem. Everybody checks. I check. You check. We all do it. But the problem is what you do with the answer and why it stops working almost immediately. And that's the part nobody ever explains. So that's exactly where we're starting, which leads us to point one. You're not asking for an opinion. You're handing over a verdict. When you ask somebody, was that okay? It sounded like you're asking for information, like you want to know something, but watch what you actually do with the answer. If they say, yeah, it was fine, you take it right away. No follow-up questions, nothing. Done. And if they say, maybe you could have worded differently, you don't treat that as a useful information either. Your stomach just drops and you probably go sulking somewhere else. So you weren't exactly collecting information at all. You were asking somebody to make a ruling and you handed them the gavel and then you stood there and waited for the verdict. And once you see it that way, a few strange things about this habit suddenly make sense. Like the fact that you often ask people who weren't even there. That call from the parking lot, the person wasn't in the room. That person had no idea how it went. They could not possibly know. And you called them anyway. And while they said, I'm sure it was fine, it still helped, which tells you the answer was never really about the room at all. Or the fact that you will sometimes ask 2 or 3 different people the exact same question, because if you were genuinely after information, one person who was actually in the room would do it. One would be enough, but you're not after information, you're after rulings, and one ruling is never quite enough. So the real question isn't, did that go okay? The question underneath it is, am I okay? And you have been quietly appointing other people to answer that one for you. And that's not a character flaw. It's just a job that got handed over early. Somewhere along the way, you learned that the fastest way to find out whether you were okay was to check somebody's face. And that worked great when you were 7. It just doesn't scale. So how do you catch yourself doing it when the whole thing happened faster than thinking? And here's the first tool. Spot the handoff. The move is this. In the moment right before you ask, and there's always a moment, even if it's a half a second, you catch what you're about to do and you name it plainly in your head. I'm about to hand this to somebody else. And that's it. That's the whole tool. And you're still allowed to ask. This isn't about stopping yourself. Now, the way to spot it reliably is by feel. Because the handoff has a very specific feel to it. It's urgent. And think about that for a second. Because real curiosity is patient. If you genuinely wanted your colleagues read on that meeting, that could wait until tomorrow, easily. But the handoff cannot wait. It's got a pressure behind it, like something needs putting down right now, this second. That pressure is the tell. When the asking feels urgent instead of curious, you're not gathering information. You're handing over a verdict. And that same feeling tells you which of your question is to leave completely alone. Because if you ask a colleague once, calmly, whether your email reads as too harsh and that colleague has actually read the email, that is just being considerate. That one is perfectly fine. The words are identical. The difference is the urgency and the repeat. 1 patient question is information. 3 urgent ones in an hour is a handoff. And it counts when there's nobody there, by the way. That 11 reread on your own sent message, same move, no audience, and it's the worst version because the text can't give you a ruling at all, so it can run all night. So when you go back for another reread, name it the same way. I'm trying to get a verdict out of something that can't give me one. And one rule before you try any of this, because it can turn on you. Do not use it to catch yourself being pathetic. You're not gathering evidence against yourself here. You're just learning to see one specific move you've been making automatically for years. If the noticing turns into beating yourself up, stop. Come back to it another day. Let me show you what spotting that handoff looks like in a scenario. Say it's a Tuesday afternoon and you're at your desk, and you just sent a slightly awkward email to your manager. Nothing terrible. You had to push back on something and you tried to be polite about it. And now that email is out there. And about 4 seconds later, you've copied that email into a chat with your friend Sam, and your thumb is hovering over send, and the message you've typed underneath it says, "Is this too blunt?" And this time, you catch it right there before it goes. Not to stop yourself, just long enough to notice, I'm about to hand this to somebody else. And then you notice the second thing, which is how it feels, because you realize you're not asking for Sam's read on your tone. This is you asking him to please take this off me. It's urgent. There's a weight behind it. And here's what's strange. Just seeing that clearly changes the temperature a little. Because for the first time, you can see the actual size of what's in front of you. It's a mildly awkward email to your manager, and you're treating it like a hearing. So why does naming the handoff do anything at all? Because you can't be handing something over and watching yourself hand it over at the same time. The second you describe the move, you step a little bit outside of it. And from out there, it stops being just what's happening, and it becomes something you're doing. That's a small gap, but the whole episode lives in that gap. And notice what it doesn't do. It doesn't stop the urge, and it's not meant to. You'll likely spot the handoff and go ahead and ask anyway most of the time, and you'll still probably do that for a while. And that's completely fine. Seeing it is the entire job at this stage. And I should be honest with you here, because I did exactly this for the first 2 weeks of making this show. So when I started this podcast, I had a routine that I could not see at the time. I finished editing the episode, and then before I publish it, I sent the whole thing to a few friends of mine. And my message to them said exactly the same thing every time. Be honest, is this any good? And I want to point at that one word, honest. I put that word in every time because it made me feel like I was being brave about it. And some of them took me at my word. A few came back with real notes. Something like, the pace of this one puts me to sleep, the middle part drags, your microphone quality needs some work. And I am genuinely grateful for those people. I mean that. This show is better because a handful of my friends were willing to be honest with me when I asked them to be. But I'd be lying to you if I said I didn't feel crushed, because I did. And that reaction right there is the whole tell. Because if I had actually been asking for information, then somebody telling me the recording still needs some work is just information. It's useful. I can work on it in an afternoon. Information doesn't level me. But what levels me is a ruling. And a ruling is what I was really asking for from everybody all at once, while telling myself I was being brave about it. So that's what's happening. A verdict going out the door. But that on its own doesn't explain the strangest part of all of this, because the relief is real. It genuinely works. So why does it run out so fast? And why does the same question keeps coming back? Which leads us to point 2. The relief is real, and that's exactly the trap. This is a mechanism nobody explains. When somebody tells you it was fine, you feel better immediately and genuinely. That's not imaginary and is not a weakness. Being told you're okay by another human being actually settles your body down. We're built for that. But look at what it settles. It settles the feeling, but it does absolutely nothing to the question. Because the question was, did I do okay? And your friend who wasn't there has not answered that. What your friend handed you was a warm feeling. And warm feelings evaporate. So 20 minutes later, that feeling is gone. And the question is still sitting there exactly where you left it. So you go and get more. And here's the part that stings. Every time you settle it from outside, you get slightly worse at setting it from inside. Not because you're weak, because of something much more ordinary than that. It's the same reason you can drive somewhere 20 times with the navigation on and still not know the route. You weren't incapable of learning. You just never once had to. And then there's a second problem, and this one's sneakier. When you go to somebody who only comforts you, who just goes, no, don't be silly, it was great. That conversation doesn't settle the worry, it feeds it. The two of you go over it together, the worry gets more airtime and more detailed, and both of you come away more preoccupied with it than when you started. And so the comfort felt good, and the loop got longer and bigger. So that's the trap, and you can see why it's so hard to spot. The reassurance that makes you feel better is the same reassurance that keeps you needing more of it. It works. That's the problem. If it didn't work at all, you'd have given up on it years ago. This works exactly the same way as an addiction, but I digress. But we're not going to try to stop you asking. That's a losing fight, and honestly, it's not even the right target. So what do we change instead? And here's the second tool. Go first. The move is this. Before you ask anybody, you give your own verdict first, out loud, or write it down in one sentence. So if you just sent a message you're unsure about, give yourself a verdict. I think that came out slightly firm, but it was fine. If you just came out of a meeting, you give yourself another verdict. Something like, I think that went okay, though I think I talked too fast at the start. And then, if you still want to ask somebody, go and ask them. You're allowed. The rule is only about the order. You go on record first. And it has to be an actual verdict, which means it has to commit to something. If you say, I don't know, maybe it was fine, maybe not, that's not going first. That's just the worry with a punctuation on it. Say what you actually think happened, including the part that wasn't great. Being specific about the flaw is what makes it a real assessment instead of a hopeful noise. Because here's what that does. Once you've said what you think, the way you look at other people's answer actually change. If you already decided the email was slightly firm but fine, and then your friend says, yeah, it was fine, that is no longer just noise. It's now a confirmation, and confirmation lands somewhere. It updates something for you. Let me show you how to apply this tool in a scenario. Say you've just got home from a first date. It's around 11 p.m. right now, and you kick your shoes off by the door, and you're sitting on the edge of your bed with your phone already in your hand. And you know two things for a fact. You talk about your job for far too long, and the last hour was genuinely good. And the reason your phone is out is that there's a friend who will tell you it went well. You already typed in the message before you hit send, and the message reads, I think I've ruined it. But this time, you go first before you send anything. You say your own verdict out loud to nobody at all, and you make yourself be specific. I overdid the work stuff in the first half hours. The second half was easy, and I like to see her again. Overall, I think that went fine. You see how that answer just came out of you? And then you text your friend anyway because you want to. And then he comes back with, you always think you've ruined it and you never have. And notice what just happened in that message. It isn't a lifeline anymore. It's somebody agreeing with your call you'd already made. So his reply doesn't rescue you. It confirms you. And that lands somewhere completely different. It actually goes in and stays in. So why does the order matter that much? Because of what their answer is allowed to be. When you've got no verdict of your own, whatever your friend says is the verdict, is the only testimony in the room. So the whole case is resting on one person who usually wasn't even there. And that's why you need a new one by 20 minutes. But when you've already gone on record yourself, now their answer isn't the verdict at all. It's a second witness agreeing with the first, and nothing is resting on it. Now, what if the second witness doesn't agree? Because that's the real fear, isn't it? Say you go first, you rule that went fine, and then your friend comes back with, honestly, I thought it was kind of awkward. And yes, that can sting. I'm not going to pretend otherwise. But look at what that sentence actually is now. Before, it was the only verdict in the room. So it just landed on you, and you had nothing to weigh it against. But now it's two readings of the same events that don't match. And two readings that don't match isn't a sentence being passed on you. It's a discrepancy. And a discrepancy is something you can go and look at. Now, I want to be honest about what the first few attempt actually feels like, because it isn't triumphant. Your own verdict will sound worthless when you say it. You'll say, I think it was fine, and hear nothing behind it, because it's coming from the person whose judgment you don't rate, which is kind of the whole problem. That's expected. It isn't a sign the tool doesn't work. The verdict isn't there to convince you today. It's supposed to be a rep. 10 of them in a row is when you notice something, not the first one. And some of those reps you will get wrong. You'll rule that was fine, and it'll turn out it landed badly, which sounds like a disaster for a tool built on trusting your own read. Except it's the most useful thing that can happen to you here, because now you know something real about how you calibrate. People who trust their own judgment aren't people who are always right. They're people who have found out how often they are right. And that's the thing you can only ever learn by going on record first. So you can see the handoff now, and you can go on record before anybody else does. But that doesn't stop you from asking for reassurance from other people. I've said that I don't know how many times by now because I mean it. So the next question is the one that decides everything. When do you ask? What should you actually be asking for? Because the thing you've been asking for is the reason none of it sticks, which leads us to point 3. Ask for something that can actually be used. Think about what you're literally requesting when you ask, was that okay? You're requesting comfort, and comfort is a genuinely nice thing to receive, but that's all it is, a comfort. Somebody telling you it was fine is not something you can use. You can't act on it. You can't improve with it. I mean, you can't even really believe it most of the time because half the time the person wasn't there and you know it. It's a warm blanket, and blanket doesn't stack. Every one of them has to be handed to you again. And that's the whole problem with the question right there. Comfort is the only thing it is capable of producing. You can ask for it 100 times and get 100 warm answers, and you will still be standing exactly where you started. So if that's the wrong thing to be asking people for, what's the right one? And here's the third tool, and it's the anchor of this whole episode. Ask for the real thing. The move is this. When you're going to ask somebody, and you are, you swap the comfort question for a question that can only be answered with actual information. So instead of, was that okay? You ask, what would you have done differently? That's the swap. Same conversation, same person, one different question. And that question can only be answered with information, which behaves in the opposite way of reassurance. You can use it so it stays. And there are 2 things that makes it actually work. First, ask somebody who was actually there. The comfort question works on anybody, which is exactly why you've been asking people who weren't in the room. But the real question needs a witness. If nobody saw it, then you haven't got a question. You've got a worry, and that's what the second tool, go first, is for. And to begin with asking for the real thing, pick a safe witness. It could be a colleague you like or something. And start with something small, where a critical answer wouldn't really cost you anything. Don't try this on your boss or something in the beginning. What you're actually building here is a tolerance for hearing the real answer, and you build that in a small room first. And second, when they answer, do not defend yourself. This is the hardest part. Maybe your colleague will say, I would have spent less time on the second slide if I were you. And everything in you is going to want to explain why you spend time on the second slide. Don't do that. Just say, that's useful. Thank you. Because the moment you defend it, you've turned it back into a hearing and you're right back where you started. Now, I know exactly what the objection is here because it's a good one. That sounds terrifying. You're already worried it went badly and now you're supposed to invite somebody to tell you what was wrong with it? But look at the deal you were on before. You asked somebody whether it was okay, and the best they can possibly come back with is that it was fine, which buys you maybe 20 minutes of comfort and zero information. And the worst they can come back with can wreck your whole evening, or days even. So you were taking all of the risk for none of the return. But this third tool, the new question flips that completely. Its worst answer is one specific and fixable thing you didn't know before. And its best answer is somebody looking at you and going, honestly, I thought that went great. I would have done exactly the same way you just did. Which, notice, is the exact reassurance you were fishing for in the first place. Except now it actually means something because they had every opportunity to say otherwise. Okay, so picture this. It's your friend's birthday and you're all out for dinner. 6 of you around the table at a restaurant, everyone talking over each other, couple of drinks in, and sitting directly opposite of you is your friend Mia. And her sister came along too and sitting right next to her. And you made a joke about Mia. You meant it kindly, but the table goes quiet for about a second before somebody changed the subject. That was pretty awkward for you. Now, normally, here's what you would do. You would go home and you would text to whichever friend you were closest from the table and ask them, was that really bad? Did I upset her? And they would say, no, it was fine. She didn't care. And you would feel better until you wake up the next morning. But this time, you ask them something they can only answer with the actual information. You know Mia better than I do. If you wanted to make that joke, how would you have done it? And now they have to actually think about it because you asked them the real question. And they go, honestly, I just wouldn't have made it in front of her sister. But if Mia was on her own, she would probably have found it funny. And look at what you're holding now. That's a genuinely useful information you didn't know at dinner. And now you'll have it forever. And you've also been told that the joke itself was fine by someone who had every opportunity to say otherwise. That doesn't wear off overnight. That's one you get to keep. So why does the real question stick when the comfort question doesn't? 2 reasons. The first is that you can act on it. And anything you can act on gets filed as knowledge instead of just a mood. Mood can evaporate any minute. Knowledge doesn't. The second one matters more. Praises you fish for never really count. And somewhere in you, you know that. Some part of you is aware that you set the question up so the kind answer was the easy one to be given. So even when it arrives, you can't quite spend it. But approval that turns up when somebody had an open invitation to criticize you, that one is clean. That's the only version that actually goes in. And here's how this third tool holds other two together. Spotting the handoff shows you the move. Going first puts you back on the hook for your own opinion. But this is the one that changes what asking even is. Because once your asking starts producing things you can use, you start to break the loop. You're not fighting the urge to check with people anymore. You're now checking for something better. And one more thing. You're never going to stop caring what other people think. And you shouldn't. That's not a defect. That's what makes you somebody worth being around. The goal was never to need nobody. The goal is much smaller than that. It's to stop borrowing a verdict you are perfectly capable of issuing yourself and to make the asking worth something when you do it. That's not confidence as a feeling. That's confidence as a habit, which is the only kind that has ever actually existed. And I'll be straight with you about the first time somebody gave me a real answer because I did not take it well at all. So I remember when I was a freshman in high school and every student had to do a science project. And I picked mine and I spent about 2 months planning it. 2 months. And I genuinely could not tell you now what that project even was, which honestly tells you everything you need to know. Because here's what I did with those 2 months. I went around and asked people. I asked my classmate, I asked my science teacher, I asked anybody who'd stand still long enough. And everybody was really nice about it. They said it sounded interesting. They said it sounded cool. And my science teacher, and I think she wanted me to learn this one the hard way, she'd give me a few pointers on how to structure the presentation and basically not much else. And then one day, I'm updating another classmate on how it's all going, same as always. And he stops me mid-sentence. And he tells me he's heard me talk about this thing a bunch of times by now. And he told me, honestly, he is kind of sick of hearing about it because he still has no idea what my idea actually is about. And I went quiet. And then I didn't speak to him for about a week. But somewhere in that week, it landed. Because if he genuinely couldn't tell where I was going with it, after hearing me describe it that many times, that isn't him being rude. That is the most useful thing anybody has said to me in 2 months. Everybody else told me it sounded cool, it sounded interesting. But he was the only one who told me something I could actually use. Let's do a quick recap, all 3 tools together, because it really is just one sequence and it'll only take a few seconds. First is the awareness. You'll spot the handoff, that urgent feeling right before you ask, where you're not after an opinion, you're after a ruling, a comfort. Then you go first, one sentence, your own verdict, specific enough to include the part that wasn't great. And then when you do ask somebody, and you should, you ask for the real thing. You don't ask whether it was okay. You ask, what would you have done differently? And you're probably going to do all of this badly the first few times. You'll spot the handoff and go and ask for comfort anyway. You'll give your own verdict and hear nothing behind it. You'll ask the real question and then argue with the answer you got. None of that is a failed attempt. That's just what the early version looks like. So remember where we started? The parking lot, phone already at your ear. You're calling somebody who wasn't even in the room and relief ran out after just 20 minutes. Now, you're probably expecting me to say the goal is to stop making that call. It isn't. You're going to make it. You'll probably make one this week. What changes is what you're calling for. Not, do you think that went okay? Because that's a ruling and you're asking it out of somebody who wasn't even there. So you say your own verdict first, out loud, in the car before you dial anybody. And then when you do get hold of somebody who was actually in the room, you ask them the real one. What would you have done differently? And this time, whatever comes back, you get to keep it. And the same goes for the other one I mentioned earlier. Asking your partner whether everything's okay between the two of you for the 3rd time this week and watching their face while you asked it. They're not tired of you. They're tired of being handed a verdict they can't make stick because it is the 3rd time and the first 2 didn't hold either. So don't ask them, are we okay? Ask them the one they can actually answer. Is there anything that's been bothering you that you haven't said? See, that one they can do something with, and so can you. Because there was never anything wrong with your confidence. You weren't short of a feeling. You had a question you couldn't close, and you went and found the fastest way in the world to make the discomfort stop, which is what any sensible person does. It just happened to be the way that has to be repeated forever. And the strange thing you'll notice eventually is that the more calls you make yourself, the less the answers matter. And the easier it gets when you ask the right question. Because you're not asking to be rescued anymore. You're just asking like somebody who wants to get better at something. So if any of this has been useful for you, send this episode to the friend who consistently calls you for comfort. The one who needs you to tell them that everything is fine. You know exactly who I'm talking about. And if you applied any of this tool this week, I genuinely love to hear about it. You can find me on Instagram at selffulpodcast or drop me in the comments on whatever you're listening to this podcast on. So this week, before you ask anybody, say what you think first, and then ask them what they have done differently. And remember, I'm always here for you. Take care.